Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I think we should have a conversation among activists about whatever's on their mind today. We've got a schmooze day coming up, and I have three American activists. They are all three in the United States. In Ann Arbor are two friends, Alan Haber, who was one of the founders and the chief honcho of the Students for Democratic Society back in the day.
Wow.
When we both remember very well, SDS, I'm sure. And his wife, Odile Huguenot Haber, is very active in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and with the World Beyond War organization, an American anti-war organization.
Actually, in Canada also.
Yes, indeed. I participated in some of their excellent shows. They put on conferences here. And Ellen Thomas is in North Carolina. And for many years, she and her husband conducted a round-the-clock vigil at the White House. And then she found
nuclear weapon.
Against nuclear weapons. So she had an organization.
For honesty and integrity in government.
That too. My husband's motto was wanted wisdom and honesty, right?
Wonderful. But she's moved off to North Carolina some years ago and does her activism from there by computer, bless your heart. So I should say that Judy Rebick is...
She's the chair of the Disarm Committee of the Women International.
Yes.
Women International League for Peace and Freedom. She's our Disarm chair.
Okay. So thank you for mentioning that, Odile. I should have recalled all of Ellen Thomas's good deeds. Anyway, Judy is a rabble rouser and a Canadian, probably one of the most best known progressive, say, organizers of various kinds of progressive events in Canada. She's based here in Toronto, and she has, she found, I say rabble rouser jokingly because she founded something called Rabble, which brings together people of progressive persuasions for sharing information. And I believe you teach at what I was, I'm on the verge of calling Ryerson University, but I did
Metro. What is it called? Metro Toronto University, isn't it? No, Metropolitan Toronto University. Yeah.
Toronto Metro.
It's a terrible name.
Yes, it's been changed.
Better than Ryerson. Ryerson was responsible for the school, forcing children, Indigenous children, into school. So there's been a 10-year fight to get them to change the name, and finally they did. And they picked like the most boring name possible.
We should call it Judy Rebick University.
Oh yeah, I don't think that would be controversial at all.
No, not at all. But let's ask Ellen about her long vigil at the White House.
And my main issue has always been to abolish nuclear weapons. When I started my vigil in 1984, there were a lot more than there are now, but it seems to me that we're never going to get rid of them because there's always some reason to keep them, according to the people in charge. I don't understand that. And I'm finding it rather frustrating and distressing that we have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It has 61 countries that have ratified, and but the nuclear weapons countries are scoffing at it and doing what they can to make sure that it doesn't go into effect.
Well, we can talk about that. In fact, that's because this is a schmooze day, anything goes. Whatever you want to talk about is perfectly fine, and we don't have to stick to any one subject.
How many years, Hélène, were you there?
Sorry.
In front of the White House?
Yes.
18. I think that the Ukraine situation could go either way. It could either lead to continued expansion of the nuclear weapons, which is what the United States wants to do. And they have a number of new nuclear weapons systems that they're developing. And so is Russia developing new nuclear weapon systems. And the TPNW brought us some hope, but now because of Russia's threats, there are people who are thinking that we can't get rid of our nuclear weapons but obviously nuclear weapons are not keeping people from invading each other. The United States has been invading countries for years. Russia has been invading countries for years, and just the production and maintenance of nuclear weapons is killing people because of the radiation. Like Odile and Alan have been working for a nuclear-free Middle East for a long time. I'd like to hear what they have to say.
Mhm.
Well, I'm working on a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. It could happen, but it has been blocked as anything else by Israel because they felt that the other countries at first they wanted to have peace with Palestinians, and they also feel that they wanted that first. And they were working with Egypt, and Egypt became impatient because they were going on very slowly. At one time, we were supposed to have a meeting in Helsinki for nuclear weapon-free zone. There was a meeting at the UN this year, but not much advance has been done so far. So we need to put it in the grassroots and more people to know about it. It could be done. There is now a lot of nuclear-free zone in the world. About, I think, 56% of the land has become part of a nuclear-free zone, like Mongolia, like South Africa. So it could be done in the Middle East, but it's a question of will. And of course, now everybody is focusing on Ukraine, and it's a very dangerous situation because the US could pretend that Russia did it and explode something nuclear, and it could become a world war in a minute. So it's a very dangerous situation, and I am just surprised that we do a vigil every week that not many people seem to have any interest in it. And it's pretty quiet, and it's hard to even pass flyers about it. We are passing right now a code pink flyer, but we will pass soon a flyer of our own because we are a coalition. But it's just very slow. Not a lot of people are interested in reacting against it so far. I don't know. There is a big focus on the Poor People's Campaign, which is supposed to happen on the 18th of June. And I hope many buses and many people will go there. But it's not much else of a movement.
I think the outcome of this, the launch of the war, not necessarily the future, but it has had contradictory effects. On the one hand, it seems to indicate that deterrence works, in that the Russians say, look, we have nuclear weapons, and that is why the US has not actually gone into war on behalf or on the side of Ukraine. They know that that would be launching a war with a nuclear power, and they would then get into a nuclear war. So the deterrence actually seems to have worked in that sense, which is contrary to the argument that we want to make. I think most of us activists want to say, well, deterrence, you shouldn't count on it. Well, in fact, you shouldn't count on it. But in this case, I think it really is a factor that's kept the US from engaging hand-to-hand in war. They're supplying weapons, but not actually sending soldiers. Now, on the other hand, the fact that for the first time in a very long time, Putin has, or any head of government has said that they intend to use nuclear weapons under certain pending circumstances that are quite possibly about to arise. So if certain things happen in Ukraine, and a lot of my friends are worried that, my Ukrainian friends are worried that if he is distinctly losing in battle and is about to, has no other means of fighting, that Putin will actually use battlefield or tactical nuclear weapons in this war. And of course, that is crossing a red line that we all thought people would never do. Well, I didn't think it, but a lot of people have believed all along that wouldn't happen. No, don't worry about it. So it's proving that nuclear weapons really are dangerous, that if you have somebody with good judgment or poor in charge of nuclear weapons, you better expect that under circumstances, they will be used. So the argument has been very strongly supported in new ways on both sides of both cases, both for the notion of, well, we really need to get on with the business of nuclear disarmament because they are dangerous. And the other point of view, well, I guess we better keep them because they work, they do deter. So I don't know which point of view is more strengthened by what has gone on so far. Yes, Ellen.
I would like to say that in order to get rid of nuclear weapons, there are some other things that have to be done also. And that is embedded in this bill that's in Congress, HR 2850 this session, the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act. And what this is requiring is that the United States will sign on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and that it will convert the arms industries to producing carbon-free, nuclear-free energy, so that instead of making missiles and bombs, people can be making solar panels and windmills and geothermal taps and tide machines and whatever other wonderful things that scientists can come up with if they're being paid to come up with those things instead of coming up with ever more lethal weapons. So it's an important thing for us to realize that in order to get rid of nuclear weapons, we're going to have to get rid of the other weapons too. And we're going to have to change our whole way of operating towards one another. We're going to have to open up our borders. We're going to have to communicate with each other and help each other out. And it's essential at this point with climate change. We don't have time to fool around anymore. Nuclear power plants make nuclear weapons grade plutonium and uranium. So we're going to have to change to a nuclear free energy system in order to be sure that we eliminate the nuclear weapons.
The sign that I carry around is end the whole war system. And I think that the situation we are in is that people are caught in so many of the big lies that it is very hard to actually think about what is going on in the world. And so we only are able to handle the top layer of the froth on the propaganda that comes from National Pentagon Radio and the few media that present information so-called to us. So really what is going on is kind of hard to know, but it is too difficult to think about it because actually it takes us back to things that we really have even greater difficult to think about. such as how was 9/11 actually engineered, how was John Kennedy killed, how were these other assassinations carried out, how was power consolidated in the Pentagon to pursue a aggressive or a persistent imperial policy. And that basically has to be called into question. And people have to say, this is just taking us down to the path of to the abyss of disaster. Because what Ellen says is quite right. There is not a lot of time to shift the orientation of the economy out of the fossil fuel system into renewables or into some more stable energy base. And the climate is suffocating the whole life system. And that will become increasingly difficult in more and more places, which will make it more and more difficult for people to see the bigger picture, because there's starvation, and there has been a cognitive dissonance that keeps people from actually going and thinking of how does the structure of power work. And so do not probe deeply into what is going on. But I think everybody does see one way or another, whether it's in health or policing or education or incarceration or in the wars, that this system of social organization is not working well for the ordinary people. By the Russian-Chinese statement looking to a restructuring of the global security system, emphasizing much more the few conventions that are from the United Nations and international law that give directions toward cooperation rather than competition. And while that long statement, 11 pages when it came to me, did not get a lot of attention, and the Ukraine war went haywire since then, that approach to restructuring the international security system from competition to cooperation and focusing on common human questions is a way to go forward.
Where did this thing come from? You say China and Russia produced a document? I don't know about it.
China and Russia put together a statement of 11 or so pages in English about a month ago. Well, no, I think it was just before the war started. So it was now 3 months ago. Both praising themselves as countries of democracy and democratic origins and so on, which was a little hard to take, but then saying that we need to shift the character of the international system away from the competitive zones to cooperative to cooperation, dealing with the common questions, and using the United Nations. Such conventions have already been established, and including the prohibition on nuclear weapons, that we should be embracing these rather than bypassing them.
Well, Adam, everything you said is true in that, we have to, if anything, the climate threat is much worse than the dangers that we're encountering as a result of the war. But the side effect of the war, one of the disasters coming out of that, is that it's distracted us from the other concerns. I mean, for example, Ellen was mentioning the fact that people have jobs in manufacturing nuclear weapons. That would have been a strong argument 6 months ago for changing over to giving these same people jobs in building solar power or whatever. That would have been an important argument. Nowadays, it just goes right past people, because the only thing people are thinking about is the war. And the same with the document that you're talking about, which I, by the way, had never heard of. But let's assume that it was a brilliant proposal. Well, it's not going to be taken seriously now, just because we're so engaged with trying to figure out what to do about this war. And I think there really are questions there that I don't have answers to. I mean, if we're going to say don't fight the war and let's just stop, then are we saying we can do nothing whatever to protect Ukrainians? I have trouble with that. I don't know what to do to protect Ukrainians. I don't know how to protect Ukrainians. Once a war starts, I don't know what to do for them.
And it's not just Ukrainians. There's people in Yemen and Syria and
yeah.
Did you see in the news today that Boris Bondarev, who is a diplomat, a Russian diplomat, has issued a statement and has resigned?
Mm-hmm.
And in his statement, he speaks of how horrified he is by what Russia is doing. And yeah, I think that we need to not hate the Russians. I feel sorry for them. They are as trapped in propaganda, or even more trapped in propaganda than we are, maybe. Although in the United States, you look at the various news agencies and thank God for the alternative media, and who knows how long they'll be allowed to continue. But you're an alternative media, and I'm glad you're doing this, Meta. It's giving people a chance to speak.
Well, let's talk seriously about what we could do instead of war. In other words, if we stopped sending weapons to Ukraine, and I've spent my life saying, stop sending weapons to anybody, stop making weapons, stop having weapons, stop fighting with weapons, just stop the war.
Take the nuclear weapons out of NATO is one thing we can do.
Get nuclear weapons out. That's a good argument. I think you might sell that. But right now, if you tell people we can't do anything for the Ukrainians, so let's just pull out and let them get killed and shrug our shoulders, I don't think that is going to go anywhere. And that whole argument now is we're facing a different set of problems for which I haven't a single good answer. And I sure hope one of you do.
Well, negotiate. Don't escalate, negotiate. And let Ukraine be neutral, not in NATO. That's important to stop the war.
Can we stop the war right now? Well, I mean, they were negotiating.
If they were negotiating with the Russian in an international conference, and the Russian would agree that NATO is going to withdraw and not be on their borders, and they might stop.
Okay. There were negotiations going on while they were fighting. So I don't think they're going to stop fighting while they're negotiating.
Well, sometimes there can be both happening. There was recently some declaration of the Greek government, I think, with the British government. And there was also some negotiation happening in Turkey. So there can be a side that's negotiating on the side of the war, and that if they come up with something that is pleasing enough to the Russian, they might stop it. Because if not, it's going to cost them a lot of money and a lot of people also. But a lot of Ukrainians are dying also. I heard this morning a very high number of Ukrainians that are the fighters that are dying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how many of you believe that there's even a faint prospect that there can be a ceasefire while negotiations are going on, and that any kind of agreement can be reached that the Russians would accept? I mean, we know pretty much what Zelensky says he would go for. He'd certainly go for a neutral country. He would, do more power sharing of some kind with the two republics in the Donbass, and he would put the Crimea on hold, sort of bracket it and say, we'll handle that later, knowing that, in fact, that's really the hard one to solve, because Russia's not going to let go of Crimea, and I don't think Ukraine has a prayer of a chance of getting it back. But at any rate, they don't want to say that. So we know what Zelensky would agree to. That should be adequate, but it hasn't made a dent in the situation.
I think the nuclear weapons on the border of Russia are something that Putin is not going to back down on. And the United States and the NATO countries really need to be willing to get the nuclear weapons out of NATO.
Judy, tell us, if you don't mind, what's on your mind, so we can.
Well,
we're all talking about.
I guess the thing that would most. I mean, obviously, we're having an election in the province of Ontario, and we have a terrible conservative government, right-wing conservative government. He's not as bad as the Republicans yet, but he wants to privatize everything, especially healthcare. So the stakes are very high, and the opposition is very weak. And so it looks like he's going to get elected again. So that's really my focus right now, but not particularly of interest here. But the thing I guess that I'm really troubled by is in Canada is the absence of a left. I mean, I have to say there's like an absence of an anti-war movement in face of the Ukraine, the Russia's attack on Ukraine, that, if you say anything the least bit critical, either, certain far left groups support Russia, which I can't understand at all. But it's a very tiny, tiny minority.
I'm glad you said that, Judy, because I'm not so sure it is so tiny.
Oh, you're not, eh? Okay.
It may simply be that my inbox in email is not at all representative. But I would say that of the emails I get from peace activists, both Canadian and foreign,
yeah,
the great majority are more. I don't want to say this, more supportive of Russia's position than by any means of NATO.
Really? Okay. Well, obviously we're connecting with different people. Okay. But anyway, so my view is what Russia did is completely unacceptable.
Right.
Completely. There's no excuse for it. But on the other hand, sorry, I just get rid of that. On the other hand, I can't be comfortable supporting NATO, for Christ's sake, and especially not building NATO, not to mention increasing military spending, right? And so, but if I post that, because I'm very active in social media, I have a lot of thought, I just get hammered. Like I haven't got hammered on anything ever, not from the left. I get hammered from the right. I don't, it doesn't bother me. So I'm very troubled by that, because it's like there is no peace movement. I mean, there was a Code Pink called for a mobilization, and there was one here in front of the Deputy Prime Minister's office, but there was hardly anybody there. And there was a speaker from the Communist Party who was almost, and this was early days too, who was relatively pro-Russia. I mean, it was awful. And nobody who was solidarizing with the Ukrainian people. But on the other hand, I solidarize with the Ukrainian people and what they're going through. But, this hero worship of Zelensky makes me insane. And if I say that, I get hammered. So I'm very troubled by that. And I don't know what it's like in the States. But I mean, really here, there's no anti-war. There's no movement that's saying we shouldn't be supporting a war. Like, let's get I think Code Pinks, and also I think the Progressive International is saying, let's get the IMF to drop the Ukraine's debt. That would be a great solidarity action. That would be a great anti-war campaign that was pro-Ukraine. But I don't see that from anywhere. So I guess and it's troublesome because at least here, and I don't think it's as bad in the States, there's no left on anything. Like the feminist movement is very weak. The labor movement is almost non-existent. I mean, we even have some unions supporting a conservative government. And so there's a very weak left. And I don't, I'm trying to figure it out. Like, is it COVID? Is it, because everything's virtual, so it's much harder to build solidarity when you can't talk to people face to face. I don't know, but really what I'm thinking
Let's
about.
see what the US people think is the
Okay.
explanation, because let's compare notes on how true that is there.
I think one of the problems is that people really are uneducated in the United States about what is going on in Eastern Europe. And there's a big, correct me if I'm wrong, Odile and Alan, but it seems to me that there's a real divide. There are the people who are like UNAC, who are pro-Russian, and
What's UNAC? Sorry, I don't know what UNAC is.
I'm sorry, I can't remember what it stands
okay,
for.
I'll just write it down. Okay.
Yeah, look it up.
Okay.
But they are,
Alan, can you tell what UNAC is? I can't help her with that.
well, if I could finish my sentence, they are talking about something that is a very real problem, which is Russians' concern about NATO. And I think that I agree completely with that, and I think that we have a responsibility to support getting NATO to withdraw the nuclear weapons, as I mentioned earlier in the call. So there's two sides to it in the United States. It seems to me there's the people who are who are anti-NATO basically, and then there are people who are anti-Russia basically. And somehow or another, we need to figure out a way to get them to talk to each other. And
then there is a lot of people that are not concerned at all.
They don't know what's going on. And
like in Canada, we have very little of a peace movement here, and very little of leftists. So because of that, people are not, there is no instruction or education about what the issue really are. And people are not educated. We don't have newspaper anymore, and most people don't read the New York Times or anything. So they don't really understand what's going on for the most part.
I know I really worked hard to try to figure out what was happening when it was first getting started, because I didn't really know anything about what was going on.
And it's also the fog of war, right? I don't believe anything that I read.
Yeah.
I have 2-3 sources, because everybody's, especially the first couple of weeks, the coverage, usually the CBC can rely on for pretty accurate international coverage, but not on this. They're practically cheering for the Ukrainian side. And so everything becomes suspect. And it's not an area of the world that I know very well. I know a lot of, and over my life, over time, I know the Middle East really well. I know Latin America really well, but I do not know Eastern Europe, even though that's where my people come from.
And there is someone who tried, a young man who came, and he tried to make us put things on TikTok, because that's where a lot of people are.
I know.
But it's only like 2 minutes or 1 minute bites. It's hard to educate anybody about a serious question on 1 minute or 2 minutes.
I founded Rabble.ca, which is a news and discussion site 20 years ago.
Oh,
we have discussion. We read. They reach. I'm not involved anymore. Lots of people. I mean, there's all kinds of progressive websites that have large readers, both in Canada and the United States.
Oh, good.
They may not read the New York Times, but they probably read in one of the websites. There's lots of them, and they get a lot of young people do read it. I don't think there's any more ignorance than there would be around the attacks on Iraq, or I don't think information's a problem. I think we have too much information, if anything. But I think the problem is people just get what they only get the information they already agree with. That's the problem. Because of the algorithm.
Judy, what do most people who are posting on Rabble, what are their perspectives now? Because I have to confess, I haven't been reading.
Yeah, I don't read I think that I don't read the discussion board on Rabble. I don't like it, but Rabble, Rabble doesn't take positions on things as a website. So, their coverage, I think their coverage has actually been more along the lines of what I'd like to see than anywhere else. That is, they're opposed to the Russian invasion, but they're also looking at the problems that are coming from
Ukraine.
support for building up NATO. And so I think there's more of a balance there than I've seen in other places. But my problem isn't there's a lack of information. My problem is there's a lack of organizing. That's the problem. There's no organized movements pressing for this or that. It's just kind of like up to the government and that's it. And that hasn't been true. I mean, I know I was very involved in fighting the American attacks in the Middle East and on Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan, all of those, we had big movements against it. And this is more complicated because it's not an American attack per se, right? It's not an American attack. And so it's more complicated. It's not as simple as being against American imperialism. But, still, where's the peace movement? Where's the peace movement? The peace movement is not where I put my energy historically, but you all have. Where is it?
Judy, I don't think anybody has any good ideas. I mean, once the blood has started to be shed, it's really hard to see an immediate intervention that we could propose that would actually save some lives. Right now, I don't know how to save anybody's life. And that's the problem.
Well, I think we have to say ceasefire, negotiate. I think we have to say it.
To whom?
How far will that take you? I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but, people are saying, it's easy to say that. And how much leverage will you get by saying that? I don't know. It doesn't have any impact whatever. They completely shrug it off. The idea
Well, the United Nations is saying that, and where is it getting them?
Well, still, it's the only thing that we can advance, really. And we are getting a little bit more people to paying attention by standing every week and passing out flyers. So that's a way to organize. It always has been. And maybe we have to start all over again, and get more organization, more of a coalition with us. There is no other way. We cannot invent another way.
It is depressing. And also, what are we doing this for? It's got to be, it's always young people that change things. We should be able to be supporting young people. I'm 76, I shouldn't have to be out in the streets, right? I will be out in the streets if I have to be, but it should be young people organizing it, and they're much better at the communications and all of that. They grew up with it. But
and young people
problem.
are
Why aren't they? That's the question that I have, because I've seen 3 generations of young people rise up. My generation, then the next generation that came in the anti-globalization movement, and then the Occupy movement, and then Black Lives Matter. So we see this is 3 different generations every 10 years. But where's this generation?
There were a lot of young people for Black Lives Matter. They were in the street.
Yeah, they were in the streets. Yeah, but that was 2 years ago, right? Things have gotten really a lot worse since then.
Hopefully, the Poor People's Campaign will trigger some action. I know that there are a number of WILF members who are going to DC for the June 18th march on Washington, and they're going to be talking. Some of the people are going to be talking about nuclear weapons. We need to be talking about that.
Yeah. And there's also the Roe v. Wade movement, right? The movement against the Supreme Court decision. So what I'm wondering is, are these movements coming together at all? Like Black Lives Matter, the poor people, the women's movement, are they coming together? Or are they just staying in their separate areas?
Not really yet.
No?
I don't see some big coalition against the war happening yet.
Mhm.
I think people remain in our silos, and some of that is the virtual reality that how many Zooms can you be on anyhow? I think
And some of it is COVID.
there has not been a break with the war economy. Even Reverend Barber kind of gives his nod to support the war as well as try and make justice at home. And until we see that the war economy is really what is ripping off the people's rights, the efforts toward improvement in healthcare, improvement in education, and so on at the domestic level is not, it's not a winning program because the money and the political energy is going elsewhere. I think it has to be a larger sense of a change of the system out of this competitive who's ruling the world to we are sharing the world, because unless we do, we're all going to be suffocating. What we're doing in Ann Arbor around the commons is how the Commonwealth has been privatized or governmentized by the private interests, whether those are the political powers or whether they're the economic powers, and what is the wealth of the people is much less in the people's control. And so the struggle for out of the enclosure that Dr. King described as racism, materialism, and militarism, and add nationalism onto that, that's the square that we are all enclosed in. And as long as we are stuck within that framework of thinking, the existing power system maintains itself. Militarism is our way. That's the basis of our economy. And racism is looking more to our identities than to our commonalities. And
You see, I don't agree with that. You see, just by saying it that way, you're putting your issue front and center. And what we need is to say, racism and colonialism, militarism, patriarchy, capitalism,
yes.
They're interconnected systems. They're completely interconnected. You can't separate one out and say this one's more important. They're all key to what's happening, right? That's why we have to unite. It's not because racism's not about identity. Racism's about dividing people according to their skin color because it suited the colonizers. I have friends who grew up in Darfur. They never experienced racism until they came here, Black people I'm talking about. So it's like, so it's like back in the 60s, people would do that. They say, nuclear power, that's the key. If we don't stop nuclear power, we can't make any gains. So that wasn't true. It wasn't true. It was important to stop nuclear power, which we didn't do, but we made lots of gains. I mean, you can't argue that, there hasn't been a revolution in the status of women since the 1960s, a revolution in the status of Black people since the 1960s. We haven't gone far enough, but enough so that most of the leadership now of all the movements are women and Black people and queer people. Like back in the 60s, you never saw that, right? So I think that it's important that we understand that whatever issue we personally have focused on in our lives, all of these issues are interconnected. One is not more important or more fundamental than the others, in my opinion. And I think that's part of what divides us, that and the purism,
But I think what Alan was saying is we need to be more humanized and coming to a common understanding, coming to a common and shared. Maybe we are too much on Zoom and, not enough in our community.
True, that's true.
Oh, I don't think so. I love Zoom. It's the solution to most of the world's problems, I think, because I'm thinking.
Well, Zoom is good for intellectuals. I'm not so sure it's good for organizing.
I don't know. I think so. Yeah, because I spend about 4 hours a day on Zoom, and I expect to be spending more because I'm thinking in terms of beyond this war, because I don't see how in the world right now to make a dent in this militarism.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to continue until somebody, either there's a stalemate, but what can happen is out of this whole mess, people will become so additionally disenchanted with the governance that's around us, both our national governments and the international order, that we're going to have an awareness that we have to have a completely new system of a world order, a new world order that
Yes.
will involve changing all kinds of multilateral structures, including improving the United Nations and coming together. That's, Alan is talking about changing our mood, our spirit, our attitudes, and so on. I think what we have to change is organizations and the way we do things. And I think what we need is a better system of international governance with an effective procedures for making international laws and for enforcing them that are really accountable to the people and not to nation states. I think our problem is we've got all these territorial entities called countries that we all feel identified with so much. The whole point is to get rid of them and have people worldwide make decisions together. And I'm promoting something based on the notion of a citizens' assembly for the world. I'm going to use my Zoom every day.
Have you ever gone to a World Social Forum?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's true that these progressive world entities have not been holding up as well as the conservative reactionary movements worldwide.
Yeah.
You have much more cooperation among these would-be thugs and dictators than you do among people like the World Social Forum or so on.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem, right? Is they don't have to worry about things like racism and sexism because they don't give a shit about it. So they can just have 10 strong men who decide how to rule the world. They don't have to deal with all the inequalities of power, right? Because they don't care about that. That's what they use to oppress people.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a strength and a weakness, both, right?
Mm-hmm. But I think
Right.
Alan and Odile work much more at the local level. I mean, Odile is saying, talk to people, individual, person to person. And I guess that's what you do. You go out to your common square in Ann Arbor and hand out leaflets. And I haven't done that for years. Is that right?
Well, out in front of the White House was a really great place to do it because thousands of people come there all the time.
Oh, that's true. From all
over the country and all over the world. Yeah. We circulated a petition for years, and WILP is circulating a petition too, supporting the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act and supporting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I think that it had an effect doing that in front of the White House. It was because
I'm sure.
I think, for one thing, I think that the movements like Occupy might have been actually inspired by the vigil that has been out there since 1981.
How much response did you get that was favorable there? Did most people walk past you and not take your leaflets, or did
most people
abuse you? Did people vilify you for being there?
In the beginning, people used to, this was when I first started, it was 1984, and people were driving by on Pennsylvania Avenue in those days. You can't do that anymore. And they'd shout, epithets at us and tell us to go to Red Square. But that changed over time. And one of the things that I noticed happen over and over and over again is that people who were in opposition would change after a while. That the people who actually lived there and saw us eventually would stop and talk to us and sometimes would tell us that we changed their minds.
Really?
Yeah, being very consistent and public in not just on Zoom, but actually putting your body on the line, it makes a difference. And I think that people who have weekly vigils, it makes a difference. Another thing that we did was we did a voter initiative, which is what led to the bill that's been in Congress since 1994. It's Judy, it's HR 2850 if you want to look it up. And this year we have more co-sponsors than we've ever had before. And they're some good ones, some really good ones that I'm really pleased to see have signed on to it. And
I'm sorry, these are co-sponsors who are Congress people?
yeah.
And who are some of the co-sponsors?
Well, I can look it up very quickly here by typing HR 2850.
Well, I thought maybe you had some
Co-sponsors.
famous
Well, I
people
don't have it all on the top of my head, but Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Presley, Carolyn Maloney, Barbara Lee, Jim McGovern, Peter Welch, Mark Pocan. Let me see if there's any others here.
Are these people connected to the Green New Deal? Because the thing that surprised me when people like Markey and Alexandra put together this Green New Deal, it did not really criticize militarism.
No.
And I just wonder if any of them have.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just signed on in March. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. That's a great list.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful.
It's a good start.
It is.
Now you need more publicity.
So, but I think that one of the things that seeds that I'm planting with WILP is we need to do voter initiatives again, because that's a wonderful way to communicate with people.
Yeah,
You're circulating a petition asking to get an idea on the ballot. And when you talk to people, registered voters have to sign it. And when you talk to people, you can say, you don't have to vote for this, but if you sign this, then you'll get a chance to vote on it. And it works. And you get a lot of people who will sign that may not actually vote on it. And in the meantime, you're planting the seed of the idea. And
Ellen, do me a favor. Write a little piece about it, like 1,000 words or 1,500 words for Peace Magazine in the next 10 days. Because I'm about to go to press in a couple of weeks with the July issue of Peace Magazine. And it's going to reach a lot more people than it used to when we were just in print. So I'd love to have an article about this bill, which we've never once covered and I don't know much about. You want to do that for me?
I will.
Perfect. Send it to me.
I don't fully understand why the left is so weak and the right is so strong. I don't understand it, and it makes me crazy. So I don't see anybody. I haven't seen any analysis that makes sense to me. And this is the main problem I see. And I think part of the problem is the culture on the left and the inability to have debate and discussion, right? So I'm really trying to promote that. So, for example, I would like to see a debate on the people who are more critical of Russia and more critical of NATO. I would like to have a comradely debate about that, but it's almost impossible to do it. It's really frustrating. So that's.
I share your concerns in that I worry about it on a global level. I keep wondering, why in the world do people keep loving these dictators and voluntarily voting them into office? That is to me,
as far as we know. Yeah.
Just drives me crazy. I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah. So that's it. Like I think there's just some way that something I don't understand.
I agree.
And it makes me crazy.
You Americans understand it any better than we Canadians? Nobody.
No. Well, I think it's human nature. It's people
but it's variable. It doesn't.
People are contentious.
Why right now in history? I don't know.
I don't know. It's.
But it's human nature. But you got a situation where you have 60% of the population in the United States and 70% of the population in Canada that are pro-choice. So how does this happen? How do you have so much, you have a Supreme Court that strikes down a law that's so reactionary? I mean, that decision, whether that's what they adopt or not, is so reactionary. I was stunned by it. It's like out of the dark ages. And yet people don't vote from their beliefs in this case.
My husband would say that it all stems from money.
From money?
Money. It all, if you wind down to the very bottom line of everything, that somebody who has money is paying for it.
Well, I agree with that.
I don't. I really, really don't. I think it has more to do with wanting to be respected and considered higher on the status hierarchy than is a given. People.
Well, yeah, and then they have to have money in order to get there, and the people who are making the money are giving them the money to do it.
There's a connection, but I don't think it's basically money. It has more to do with pride and dignity and wounded self-esteem and a sense of slipping in the society's rankings. My friend Arlie Hochschild, with her book Strangers in Their Own Land, talks about that. And right now she's hanging out with Nazis in your part of the world, I guess not North Carolina, but someplace around there, trying to get to know them and inside their psyches so that she can describe their motivation. But she agrees with me that it's not really about money. It's about she and I are Weberians. And
no, I don't think it's about money. Why people don't. I think the culture is totally based on money.
Right.
The economy is totally based on money. Yeah. And it's insane. Like for the last so for example, I just saw an article today. For the last 2 years, there's been a new billionaire created every week. And the rest of us are all like going down into the toilet financially, right? So why aren't people up in arms about that? Is it? That's my concern, is that people, like, there's the inequality, which has been massive for a long time now, for 20 years anyway, 30 years, has become just insane how bad it is. And still there's not an uprising against it.
I recall at the beginning of the Iraq wars, when people gathered in the thousands to oppose what was about to happen, there was the view that there was a third force in the world called civil society. And I think that is in some way what we have to rebuild a sense of, that there is a civil society that is different from the governmental organizations and the big corporation organizations that are the rulers. And that it is from the civil society that has to come the call to stop the war, to come to the table to talk, to have negotiation, to make some cooperative sense of how we deal with the problems of the future. This is a matter of the individual people seeing that there is a society that is different from the governmental organizations, that there is less and less trust in. This whole sense of what is a state. A state is a government with a flag and with an army, is the product of the 19th and earlier centuries imperialism. And we need to have a different sense of a state that is in the loyalties of people, and people actually have multiple loyalties. And we need to change the sense of a state from exclusive sovereignty to non-exclusive and multiple sovereignties. And that's what we are experiencing in this country. And that's also what is going on in Israel and Palestine. And it's also what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, that the sense of a single sovereignty is really not the reality in the globalized world these days.
I love that. I wish we could talk about it further, but we're 15 minutes over.
Meet you, Judy.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
Good to see you, Ellen. Thanks, Meta.
Good to
See
see
you.
you.
See you, Odile.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode 454. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to that website, look around because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You will see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.